You're gonna want to see this dog's mouth. I've never seen anything like it." I said it without thinking, but the second the words left my lips, I knew I wasn't being dramatic. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. But not in the way you might think. I was standing in exam room 2 of Oak Ridge Animal Clinic in a pair of scrubs that smelled faintly like disinfectant and peanut butter, staring at the stray German shepherd curled in the corner. The dog had refused water. That's what started it all. Not a sip, not a lick. When I tried coaxing her with a shallow dish, she recoiled like I'd offered poison. Even when I added ice cubes, which usually makes the pups go wild, she didn't budge. That's when I knew this wasn't just another routine rescue. Dr. Carter, who had been flipping through patient charts outside, stepped in. He was in his 60s, retired once already, but came back because, as he liked to say, "A quiet life makes me twitchy." He'd seen everything in his decades of veterinary work, but when he crouched down and gently opened that dog's mouth, I watched the color drain from his face. He didn't say anything for a good 5 seconds, just stared. Then he looked at me, blinking like someone who'd been shaken awake. "Get the camera," he said. "My name's Josh. I'm a vet tech at Oak Ridge, a small clinic tucked between a bakery and a feed store in rural Tennessee. We get all kinds: lost pets, barn cats with attitude problems, the occasional raccoon someone tries to pass off as a weird-looking dog. But this dog, this stray, was different. From the moment animal control dropped her off, something about her unsettled me. She wasn't aggressive or scared, just quiet, like she was watching everything but didn't want to be seen. The officer who found her, Rick, had said she was sitting in the middle of a dried-up field, not far from the old Miller farmhouse that burned down last winter. No collar, no microchip, no tags, just a thick coat full of burrs and a gaze that made you feel like you were the one being evaluated. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She just followed when led, sat when told, and flinched at the sound of running water. We named her Abby, short for abandoned. Not the most creative, I know, but it felt right. After the mouth inspection, Dr. Carter pulled me aside. "There's something embedded in her upper palate," he whispered, clearly shaken. "But it's not natural. It looks metallic, like a chip or a shard. We'll need imaging." We moved her to the back room where the X-ray machine lived. I held her steady, feeling the tremble in her body. She didn't fight. Not once. I don't know what was more unsettling, her obedience or her silence. Dr. Carter developed the images while I prepped a crate for Abby to rest in afterward. I layered it with soft blankets and a bit of shredded newspaper, still thinking about how she wouldn't drink. Most dogs come in half dehydrated and lap up water like it's the best thing they've tasted. But Abby just stared at it like it was a bad memory. 10 minutes later, Dr. Carter called me over. He had the X-rays spread across the light board. His finger pointed at something lodged in the roof of her mouth. It was small, oval-shaped, but it had the telltale glint of something artificial. "That's not an injury," he murmured. "That's been placed." "Like someone put it there?" He nodded slowly. "It's not bone, not dental. That's man-made. Looks like a tag or maybe a tracker." I felt a chill creep up my neck. Who puts a tracker in a dog's mouth? "I don't know," Dr. Carter replied, "but we're going to find out." We scheduled surgery for the next morning. I stayed late, sleeping in the back office with one eye open and my ears tuned to every shift and creak in the building. Abby didn't make a sound all night. By sunrise, I was brewing strong coffee and checking vitals. Her temperature was normal, heartbeat steady, still refused water. Dr. Carter came in with his surgical kit already unpacked. "Let's keep it simple," he said. "We extract the object, stitch the tissue, and monitor for infection. No risks." The surgery itself was quick, a clean incision, minimal bleeding. What he pulled out left us speechless. It was a chip, all right, but not like any I'd seen in my 5 years in animal care. It wasn't shaped like a pet tracker, nor was it labeled. Just a smooth, gray disc the size of a fingernail. When Dr. Carter set it on a tray, it emitted a soft hum. "I don't like this," he muttered. After the extraction, Abby drank for the first time. Just a little at first, then more. It was like something had been lifted. Her eyes softened. She even gave my hand a small lick. "She's changing," I said. Dr. Carter nodded. "Or maybe she's coming back." Over the next few days, we ran tests on the chip, sent images to a few university contacts, but no one recognized it. Dr. Carter eventually locked it in a cabinet and focused on Abby's recovery. She gained weight, started wagging her tail when I walked in. Still didn't bark, but there was something peaceful about her silence now. People started coming in just to see her. Word had spread that we'd found a mystery dog. Even kids from the high school dropped by after class. Abby seemed to enjoy the attention, sitting by the front desk like she owned the place. Then came the day that changed everything. A man walked in, mid-40s, wearing jeans too clean for someone who claimed to be a rancher. Said he was looking for a lost dog. When I asked him to describe her, he rattled off details that were too precise, down to the scar on her back leg. But something was off. He never looked at Abby directly. When she saw him, she didn't wag her tail. She stiffened. "She yours?" I asked. The man smiled thinly. "She was part of a project. Belonged to my brother." Dr. Carter came out from the back, wiping his hands. "Project?" The man glanced at the locked cabinet, like he knew. "I'll take her now." "Not without proof of ownership," I said, heart pounding. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, but I didn't care what it said. Abby was pressed against my leg, shaking. Dr. Carter stepped between us. "You'll need to leave." The man's smile faded. He tucked the paper away and turned without a word. As he walked out, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. His boots were clean, but the soles were stained with red clay, the kind you only find near the burned Miller farmhouse. Abby didn't sleep that night, neither did I. We installed new locks the next morning. Something told me this wasn't over. Dr. Carter didn't speak for a long time after the man left. He just stood by the window, watching the empty parking lot like he expected that dusty white pickup to roll back in at any moment. Abby stayed close to me, her body pressed so tight against my leg, I could feel her ribs expand with every breath. She was watching the door, too, ears low, eyes darting. "He's not coming back today," I finally said, trying to convince both of us. Dr. Carter didn't look at me. "That man wasn't here for a dog." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. Later that day, I stayed after closing to sweep the lobby, but my mind kept going back to the way Abby had reacted to him. There was something deeper than fear there, something like recognition and rejection tangled together. Whatever that man had done, wherever she'd come from, she didn't want to go back. Dr. Carter joined me around 8. He set down 2 mugs of lukewarm coffee and sighed as he lowered himself onto the bench across from the front desk. "Still thinking about him?" I asked. "Been thinking about that chip," he said. "It's not like any implant I've ever seen. No serial number, no ID. It wasn't built to be found." I nodded. She wouldn't drink until it was gone. I think it was doing more than tracking. He didn't elaborate, but the look in his eyes told me enough. He was afraid. Not just for Abby, for what she might represent, for what that chip might have been doing. That night, I took Abby home with me. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom with a fold-out couch and a half-dead fern, but it was warm, quiet, safe. I laid out a blanket for her by the window, and she curled up without hesitation. It was the first time I saw her sleep soundly. No twitching paws, no restless pacing, just peace. I sat on the floor beside her and whispered, "You're safe now. No one's gonna hurt you again." The next few days passed in a blur. Dr. Carter kept the chip locked up, refusing to hand it over to anyone, even when a woman claiming to be from a research institute showed up asking questions. She had credentials and a clipboard full of fancy diagrams, but her smile never reached her eyes. "Isn't it strange?" she said casually. "How many people are suddenly interested in one stray dog?" Dr. Carter didn't flinch. "She's not just any dog. She's ours now." She didn't push after that, just handed over a business card and told us to call if anything new developed. Then she was gone, her black SUV kicking up gravel as she disappeared down the road. Meanwhile, Abby was changing. Her coat was still shaggy, but she moved with more confidence. She started greeting patients at the clinic, standing politely near the front desk, as if she'd appointed herself the unofficial greeter. People adored her. Kids, especially. She had a gentleness about her that put people at ease. But she still flinched at running water, still refused to go near sinks or hoses. Even the sound of a faucet made her back away. I tried everything: gentle exposure, treats, even turning the faucet on low and sitting beside her. But nothing worked. It wasn't just fear, it was something else. Trauma, maybe. One afternoon, I brought in my neighbor's golden retriever, Max, hoping his laid-back attitude would rub off. The two sniffed each other politely, then lay down side by side like old friends. For a while, it looked like things were improving. Then Max barked at a passing truck, and Abby froze. Her whole body tensed, her gaze locked on the vehicle like it was more than just a loud engine. Something about that moment stuck with me. The way she didn't bark, didn't growl, just stared. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Dr. Carter said, about how the chip wasn't meant to be found. What if it was doing more than tracking? What if it was controlling? The next morning, I asked Dr. Carter, "Do you think it was sending signals to her brain?" He didn't answer right away. Theoretically, yes. It's possible, but we'd need a lab to prove it. What if someone was testing her, seeing what she'd do under certain conditions? He looked at me grimly. Then they failed, because she chose to survive. A week later, things got worse. I came into work early to feed the boarders, but when I opened the back door, I found the lock smashed and the cabinet where we'd stored the chip torn open. The chip was gone. Dr. Carter arrived 10 minutes later. I showed him the damage, and he stood there with his jaw clenched, his fists shaking. "They knew where to look," he said quietly. "Who do we call? The police?" He shook his head. "They wouldn't understand. This isn't a crime they're equipped to handle." We reviewed the security footage. A single figure, masked and gloved, had broken in around 2:15 a.m. They moved with purpose, bypassing everything else and heading straight for the cabinet. In less than 2 minutes, they were gone. The strange thing? Abby didn't bark. She was in her crate near the front, but she never made a sound. She just watched. That same day, A letter arrived in an unmarked envelope. No return address. Just one line written on plain paper. She belongs to us. Don't interfere again. We reported the break-in as vandalism, but neither of us mentioned the chip. We both knew the truth wouldn't help. It would just invite more attention. That night, I made the decision to move. Not permanently, just somewhere Abby and I could lay low for a while. My uncle owned a cabin in the woods about 2 hours north, near a lake where the cell phone signal was patchy and the nights were quiet. He used it for fishing trips and let me borrow the keys whenever I needed to get away. I didn't tell Dr. Carter right away, just said I was taking a long weekend. He nodded, understanding more than I said out loud. "Keep her safe," he said. We left that afternoon. The drive up was uneventful, but Abby didn't settle until we passed the city limits. She sat up straighter, ears perked, like she could feel the distance growing between her and whatever haunted her. When we arrived, she jumped out of the truck and sniffed the air like it was the first time she could breathe freely. The cabin was simple: 2 rooms, a wood stove, and a deck that overlooked the lake. I lit a fire, set out some food, and watched as Abby explored the cabin's corners. She seemed more curious than cautious now, like she was rebuilding trust one step at a time. That night, we sat by the lake. The water was still, reflecting the moon like glass. Abby lay beside me, her head resting on my knee. For the first time since I met her, I heard her sigh. Not a whimper or a growl, just a long, peaceful sigh. And then, out of nowhere, she barked, just once, loud and sharp. I looked around, startled. Nothing moved. No animals, no lights, no sounds but the crickets. "Hey," I whispered. "What is it?" She didn't bark again, but her body was stiff. Eyes trained on the tree line. I stood, heart racing. "Is someone there?" No answer, no movement. But Abby didn't lie back down. I stayed up most of the night, one hand on the flashlight and the other resting on her back. She never barked again, but she never took her eyes off the dark woods. In the morning, I found footprints. Fresh, human, leading up to the edge of the deck, then back into the trees. I didn't call Dr. Carter. I didn't want to risk the line being tapped. I packed our bags. We were leaving. But as I loaded Abby into the truck, I noticed something glinting under the porch. I knelt down and pulled it out. A small black box, no bigger than a deck of cards. A tracking device. Still blinking. They'd found us. But how? I smashed the device with a rock, heart pounding, mind spinning. Abby looked at me with those deep brown eyes, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. They didn't need the chip anymore. They had something better. They had a signal she could still feel, and they were getting closer. I drove until the gas tank dipped below a quarter, and my knuckles had turned white from gripping the steering wheel. Abby lay curled on the seat beside me, eyes open, head up. She didn't make a sound, but I could tell she was listening. Every few miles, her ears would twitch, and her eyes would lock onto something I couldn't see. I didn't ask what she heard. The black box I found under the porch had rattled something loose in me. It meant they knew where we were. Maybe they'd always known. Maybe it was just a matter of time. I kept replaying it in my head, her reaction to the tree line, the single bark, the footprints. Someone had come for her again. And now they were watching. I turned off the highway into a small town I barely remembered the name of, the kind of place where gas stations doubled as diners and everyone's dog sat in the bed of a truck out front. I pulled into a rundown motel with a faded green roof and parked in the back where the lights didn't quite reach. Abby followed me inside without hesitation. We didn't turn on the TV or open the blinds. I laid her blanket down by the bed and sat with my back against the door, staring at the deadbolt. I knew I wouldn't sleep. I didn't expect her to either, but within minutes, she was out cold, breathing slow even. For the first time in days, I let myself believe maybe, just maybe, she felt safe again. Morning came in pale slivers through the thick curtains. I made us both breakfast, microwaved eggs for me, plain kibble for her. She didn't touch the food at first, just looked at me. Then, after a long pause, she padded over and ate in silence. We needed answers, real ones, and I knew only one person who might help. My brother Ethan had spent the better part of his adult life taking apart electronics and putting them back together for the government. He never talked about what he worked on, just that it paid well and gave him ulcers. We weren't close anymore, not after what happened with Dad, but he owed me one. A big one. I called from a burner phone I'd picked up at a drugstore. The line clicked once before he answered. "This is Ethan." "It's me," I said. Silence. Then, "Where are you?" "Can't say. Need a favor." "That dog you picked up. It's not just a stray, is it?" That stopped me. "How do you know about her?" "I've got friends still inside. Word gets around. You're being watched." I figured. "You still have the chip?" "No. Someone broke in. Took it." Another long pause. "Then you better bring the dog. If they're still tracking her, she's the last piece they need." "What does that mean?" He didn't answer directly. Just gave me an address in Maryland and told me not to stop until I got there. I hung up and looked at Abby. She was staring out the window now, ears forward, muscles tight, like she already knew we were moving again. We drove for almost 10 hours that day, stopped only for gas and a few minutes of fresh air at a rest stop where Abby refused to walk more than a few feet from the car. She didn't drink water until we were back inside. When we arrived at Ethan's place, it was past midnight. His house was tucked into the woods behind a long gravel driveway with motion sensors at every turn. It looked more like a bunker than a home. He met us at the door holding a flashlight and a shotgun. He lowered the gun when he saw Abby. "She's bigger than I thought." "She's smarter than you think too," I said. He let us in, checked every window and door behind us, then led us down into what he called his lab. It was a converted basement packed with monitors, drives, soldering equipment, and a coffee machine that looked like it could launch rockets. I told him everything. The chip, the man at the clinic, the woman with the clipboard, the black box under the porch. He listened without interrupting, eyes flicking now and then to Abby, who sat patiently at my feet. When I was done, he rubbed his face and leaned back in his chair. "This goes deeper than I thought." "That chip? It wasn't just a tracker. It was a behavioral modifier. Prototype tech. They've been experimenting with remote stimulus triggers, emotional, sensory, even involuntary response." I felt sick. "You're saying they were controlling her?" "Influencing, more like. Suppressing instincts, heightening certain reactions. It's still in testing stages, but someone skipped a few steps." "Why put it in a dog?" Ethan looked at Abby. "Because dogs don't sue, and they follow orders." He scanned her with a handheld device, running it along her head, spine, limbs. "No other implants I can detect. But she's probably still picking up residual signals. Might be why she barks randomly. Something triggers a memory, or a leftover command." I thought of her bark by the lake. How sudden it was. How focused. Can you block it? Ethan nodded. I can rig a dampening collar. Won't stop the signal, but it'll scramble the reception. Give her a break. He worked through the night. Abby never left my side. By dawn, the collar was done. A simple band with a small black box built into the strap. He adjusted it carefully, watching Abby's reaction. She didn't flinch, just sat still, like she understood. We'll test it, Ethan said. See how she responds over the next 24 hours. She responded immediately. Within an hour, she drank water without hesitation. Explored the basement on her own. Even lay down by the heater and fell asleep, deeply, legs twitching in a dream. Ethan watched her, eyebrows raised. It's working. Whatever was keeping her on edge, it's dulled now. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a tightness in my chest. If this collar made her feel normal, then what kind of hell had she been living in before? The peace didn't last long. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Ethan's perimeter alarm went off. 3 vehicles, no plates. 2 SUVs and a van. He shut down the basement lights. We've got visitors. I grabbed Abby's leash, but she didn't need it. She was already at the door, ready to move. Ethan opened a panel in the wall, revealing a tunnel lined with emergency lighting. Old storm shelter. Comes out a mile south. Go. What about you? I'll stall them. Get her to safety. I hesitated. Then I grabbed his shoulder. Don't be a hero. He smirked. Not my style. Abby and I ran. The tunnel was damp and narrow. She kept pace beside me, quiet and alert. Halfway through, I heard a sound behind us. Distant, muffled. A door being kicked open. Voices shouting. We didn't stop. When we emerged in the woods, I pulled her behind a tree and scanned the tree line. No lights, no vehicles. We were alone. We hiked until we hit the edge of an old logging road. From there, I flagged down a passing trucker who agreed to drop us off 2 towns over. I gave him some story about a busted car and a lost dog. He didn't ask questions. We got out near a diner and sat behind the building until the sun rose. Abby slept with her head on my lap. I didn't sleep at all. At sunrise, I checked the news. Ethan's house had burned to the ground. No injuries reported. Cause unknown. I didn't cry. Not then. But Abby looked at me like she knew something terrible had happened. We couldn't run forever. And we couldn't hide. Whoever they weren't going to stop. And if we wanted answers, we had to go to the source. Abby nuzzled my hand, and for the first time, I saw it in her eyes. Not just fear or survival. Something else. Resolve. We were going to finish this. Together. The diner was one of those places where everything came with a side of hash browns, and the coffee tasted like it had been sitting in the pot since the Nixon administration. I sat in a corner booth with Abby beneath the table, her body curled around my legs like she was part of me. Her eyes never left the door. I nursed a cup of coffee and stared at the map Ethan had given me before we left his place. It wasn't labeled like a normal map, just lines, intersections, and 3 points marked with tiny red X's. One of them had a circle drawn around it and a note scrawled beside it. Burton Facility. Last known signal. Ethan had found it buried in a data dump from an old satellite tracking file. Some signal tied to the chip in Abby's mouth had pinged near Burton, Virginia, an unremarkable town not far from a military training site. No public records listed anything unusual, but that only made it more suspicious. Burton was our destination. We left the diner before the breakfast rush, heading east on quiet roads. I stuck to back highways and country lanes, doubling back at odd intervals, and keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror more than the road ahead. No one followed. But that didn't mean we weren't being watched. By late afternoon, the terrain started to shift. Thicker forests, fewer houses. I stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of town and filled up the tank. The clerk didn't ask questions, but his eyes lingered on Abby like he wanted to. I paid cash and got back in the truck. Burton itself was small. Too small. The streets were mostly empty, and those who were out didn't wave. Just watched. Most of the buildings looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. A single barber shop, a diner with a closed sign even though it was lunchtime, one gas station, one church, and no kids anywhere. I parked a few blocks from the address Ethan had circled. It wasn't much, just a long dirt road behind a chain-link fence marked with a faded "No Trespassing" sign. Beyond the fence, the trees grew dense and uniform. Too uniform. Abby stared at the road like she remembered it. I checked my gear. A flashlight, the burner phone, a folding knife I barely knew how to use, and Ethan's old field scanner. It had a modified signal detector that could pick up strange frequencies, whatever that meant. I slipped it into my backpack and clipped the collar snugly around Abby's neck. We crossed the fence where the chain hung loose and started down the road. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. Not just the usual forest quiet. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of gravel underfoot and the sound of Abby's breathing. After about a mile, the trees gave way to a clearing. And there it was. The Burton facility. It looked abandoned. A squat concrete structure half buried in the ground, like a Cold War bunker someone had forgotten about. The windows were bricked up. The main door was rusted shut, but the side entrance was ajar. Abby stood still, her nose twitching. I scanned the building with Ethan's device. At first, nothing. Then the screen lit up with a soft pulse. Signal detected. We went inside. The hallway was damp and cold. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows against the peeling walls. Abby moved ahead of me, nose to the floor, tail low. She wasn't afraid. She was focused. We passed rows of empty rooms, old labs, storage closets, an office with yellowed paper still clinging to the bulletin board. Most of it looked untouched for years, but there were signs of recent activity. A trail of muddy boot prints, a crate that had been opened recently, a broken coffee cup near a workstation. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. We reached a locked door near the end of the hall. The scanner pulsed brighter. Whatever was behind it, the signal was coming from there. I pried the lock with Ethan's folding tool, heart pounding. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow stairwell leading down. Abby didn't hesitate. She descended first, paws silent on the concrete. At the bottom was a room. Clean. Functional. Lit by a generator that hummed softly in the corner. Monitors lined one wall, most dark, but one still flickering with static. A large table dominated the center, and on it, another collar. Not like Abby's. This one was bulkier, heavier. There were dried stains on the strap, and beside it, a file folder labeled Project Hazel. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were photos, documents, charts, test logs. Most of it was jargon I couldn't decipher, but some pages were clear. Subject 7, Female GSD, responsive to auditory and visual cues, memory suppression effective, aggression conditioning unsuccessful, recommend transfer to long-range behavioral trial. Abby. There were pictures of her, in a cage, with wires taped to her head. I looked at her now, standing beside me, steady and calm. They'd done this to her. They'd tried to make her into something, some kind of tool, weapon, experiment. And she'd survived. A sudden noise behind us made me spin. Footsteps. I killed the light and pulled Abby behind a crate. 2 figures entered. One tall, one shorter, both in tactical gear. They had weapons, but they weren't drawn. I could hear them talking. "Signal's active again. It's close." "Any sign of the dog?" "Not yet, but she's here. She always comes back." They split up, one heading toward the stairs, the other deeper into the room. I waited until the one near us passed, then slipped out behind him. Abby stayed low, silent as a shadow. We moved fast. Out the door, back up the stairs, through the hall. I heard a shout, "She's here!" And then we were running. They chased us through the trees, but Abby knew the path. She ducked low and led me through a thicket that tore at my jacket and face, and we emerged near the road. Gunfire cracked behind us. I dove, rolled, and heard a yelp. Not from Abby. From one of them. We didn't stop. Back over the fence. Into the truck. I peeled out just as headlights flared in the rearview mirror. They were following. I took the first side road I could find, barreling through narrow turns until the signal behind us faded. I didn't slow down for another 20 minutes. When we finally stopped, I checked Abby. She was okay. Bruised, maybe, but not hurt. The file was still in my pack. Proof of what they'd done. We couldn't go to the police. Couldn't go back to the clinic. But we had something now. Something they didn't want anyone to see. And someone who had lived through it. Abby put her head on my shoulder as I leaned back in the seat. She was tired. So was I. But it wasn't over. Not yet. We camped off an unmarked service road 20 miles outside Burton. I didn't want to risk a hotel, and Abby needed open space. She paced the clearing for hours, sniffing the air, scanning the woods. But she never barked. I laid out the file on the truck's tailgate and sorted through it by lantern light. Project Hazel. That name haunted every page. The dog they called Subject 7 wasn't the only one. There were others. Numbers 1 through 10, each with their own summary reports. But Abby's file was the thickest. She'd lasted the longest. The pages outlined tests I could barely comprehend. Remote activation of fear responses, scent aversion rewiring, trauma re-exposure loops. But one line stood out among the rest. Subject 7 demonstrates unique cognitive elasticity, possible long-term independent adaptation outside test parameters. Recommend full recall and re-evaluation. That's why they were chasing her. Not because she was dangerous, but because she had become something they didn't understand. Something they couldn't control. I stared at Abby lying near the fire, her eyes half closed, but her ears still listening. She wasn't a lab subject. She wasn't some failed prototype. She was just a dog. One who had been hurt, broken down, and still chose to trust. I couldn't run anymore, not without a plan. We needed help, but not the kind you find in the phone book. There was one person left, Rick Bannister. He was the officer who brought Abby in that first day, the one who found her in the field near the burned-out farmhouse. I hadn't thought much about him until now, but something about that detail, where she was found, kept nagging at me. That fire had been ruled accidental, but the file hinted at something else. Deployment site, Miller property, Sector C2. Subject released for independent behavior analysis. Scheduled retrieval, 11:14. Subject not recovered. That farmhouse wasn't random. They let her go. And she didn't come back. Rick worked for the county, and if anyone knew what happened on that land, it was him. I drove through the night, taking back roads and avoiding major intersections. We rolled into town just before sunrise. The police station was a squat brick building with a single cruiser out front. I parked across the street and waited until the lights inside flickered on. When Rick stepped out onto the sidewalk holding a coffee mug and a manila folder, I approached. He squinted at me. "Josh? From the clinic?" "Yeah, I need a minute." His eyes dropped to Abby, who stood close beside me. His face changed. "Is that her?" "Yeah." He gestured to the bench outside the station. "Talk fast." I handed him the folder with the Project Hazel file inside. He flipped through it slowly. Didn't say much at first. Then he let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. "I knew something wasn't right," he said. "The night I found her, she didn't act like a stray. She walked right up to me and sat down, like she was waiting, but when I tried to leash her, she growled. Then she just followed me to the truck like it was her choice." "What about the farmhouse?" He nodded. "That place was weird. No power, no furniture, but there were boot prints in the dust, and a table with restraints bolted to the floor." My stomach turned. "I didn't put that in my report," Rick admitted. "I knew they'd bury it. Sheriff said it was probably some squatters, told me not to stir the pot." "Who's they?" I asked. Rick looked around, then leaned closer. "Couple months before I found her, a guy from out of state started poking around. Said he was with an animal behavior group. Real slick, had credentials, but something felt off. They asked about secluded properties, places no one went. I didn't think anything of it. Then the farmhouse burned, and a week later I find her." "She escaped," I said. Rick nodded. "Looks like?" I showed him the photo from the file. Abby with wires taped to her fur. He paled. "What do you want from me?" "I need to know who else they talked to. Who helped them set this up? Someone local had to be in on it." Rick scratched his beard. "There's one guy, works over at the utility office. Name's Dwight. He does grid checks and land assessments. If someone wanted power or water routed to an off-grid site, they'd go through him." "Where do I find him?" Rick hesitated. "He's private, keeps to himself, but he owes me a favor." He made a call. An hour later, I was sitting in a rusted lawn chair behind the utility office, while Dwight flipped through a battered field log. Abby lay nearby, chewing a stick like she didn't have a care in the world. But I knew better. "This entry here," Dwight said, tapping a page. "Last fall. Temporary grid access authorized for Departmental Research Division. No return contact, just a drop box at a PO address." He turned the log so I could see. The coordinates matched the Miller farmhouse. "There's more," he added. "2 other sites requested by the same group. One outside Knoxville, another near a wildlife preserve in North Carolina." "Are they still active?" Dwight shrugged. "No idea. But if you're going there, take a camera. And don't go alone." We drove out to the North Carolina site first. Easier to disappear in the mountains. The preserve was vast. Dense woods, winding dirt trails, scattered cabins for park rangers. But the coordinates led us to a cave system tucked behind a waterfall, half hidden by moss and rock. The entrance was marked with a steel post driven into the ground. A broken cable dangled from it. I scanned the area. No footprints, no trash. But Abby growled, low and deep. Inside, The cave was cold and dry. Stale air. My flashlight picked out shapes along the wall. Hooks, clamps, old wiring, animal crates stacked in a corner. Then I saw the name. Hazel. It was scratched into the stone wall, not printed, not labeled. Scratched. By hand. Someone had been kept here. Maybe not just Abby. I snapped photos of everything, made notes, bagged a few items, old tags, a strip of harness, a shard of what looked like a broken implant. Outside, Abby was alert, scanning the horizon. We left quickly. Back in the truck, I reviewed the footage. It all fit. The project wasn't isolated. It was part of something larger, a network. Testing centers hidden in plain sight. I reached out to a contact of Ethan's, an investigative reporter named Brian. He agreed to meet us at a motel outside Asheville. He'd worked on animal testing stories before, and Ethan had once leaked him a story that made headlines for weeks. Brian was in his 40s, sharp eyes, quiet voice. He listened as I laid everything out, showed him the file, the photos, the footage from the cave. He didn't say much until I was done. Then, "This could be big, really big. But we need something indisputable. A name, a whistleblower, or..." He looked at Abby. "A subject who can be verified." "She's been through enough," I said. "I'm not suggesting we exploit her, but if we could get DNA proof, medical scans, maybe even a behavioral exam by an independent specialist, it would support the documents." I looked at Abby. She was watching me again, like she knew her story wasn't just hers anymore. "Okay," I said, "but we do it on our terms." Brian agreed. He set up a series of secure tests with a trusted vet, one who specialized in trauma cases. Everything would be anonymous. The results would be verified, cross-checked, and sent to multiple outlets simultaneously if anything went wrong. While we waited for the tests, I kept digging. I traced the P.O. box used for the grid requests, found a payment link that tied to a shell corporation out of D.C., cross-referenced that name with Ethan's old clearance database. One match. A defense contractor specializing in neuroadaptive tech. That was the missing piece. We had a name. We had a trail. Now we just needed to decide what to do with it. The night before the report was scheduled to go live, I sat with Abby under the stars. She pressed close, breathing warm against my arm. "You ready for this?" I asked softly. She didn't move, just rested her head on my chest. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like we were running. We were getting ready to fight. The report was scheduled to go live at noon. Brian had sent the files to a small but credible news outlet with a reputation for exposing hidden government contracts. He also distributed them to 3 independent investigators, including a watchdog group that specialized in animal rights violations. The plan was simple. Make it impossible to bury. I paced outside the motel room while Abby watched from the window. The air was tense, heavy like the minutes before a storm. My burner phone buzzed at exactly 11:45. Brian's name popped up. "We're green," he said. "Everything's set. It'll go live in 15. Think they'll retaliate? I think they're already watching. But once it's out there, they'll lose control of the narrative. You did the right thing." I hung up and went inside. Abby walked over and leaned against me. I buried my face in her fur, her warmth grounding me. At 12:00 p.m., the story broke. Within 10 minutes, the site hosting it went down from traffic. But mirrors popped up everywhere. Screenshots, summaries. People were already sharing the photos from the cave, the scan of the chip, Abby's behavioral exam results. They called it the Hazel Project leak. A handful of former employees started speaking anonymously, confirming details, feeding the fire. But the most powerful piece wasn't the documents. It was Abby's face. Brian had included a photo. Just one. Her curled beside me, resting after the collar was removed. Something about the image struck people. The story wasn't just about experimentation. It was about recovery, survival, healing. By nightfall, the pressure had started. News crews were contacting the clinic. Protesters had gathered outside a government research center in Colorado, one tied to the defense contractor in Ethan's database. But not all the attention was good. That night, someone tried to break into the motel. I woke to the sound of glass cracking. Abby was up before I was, teeth bared, growling low. I grabbed the flashlight and edged toward the window. A shadow moved across the lot, then darted out of sight. Tires squealed in the distance. The next morning we left. Brian had a backup plan, a safe house owned by a friend tucked in the Blue Ridge Mountains. A real cabin this time. No storm shelters or metal walls, just thick trees, an old wood stove, and a working landline. We drove 6 hours through winding roads, switching vehicles twice thanks to Brian's contacts. By the time we arrived, Abby was pacing again. Her collar was still on, but she seemed restless, like something in the air had changed. I tried to settle her, made her food, sat with her by the fire, but every few minutes she'd lift her head and stare at the door. The next morning, Brian called. His voice was strained. One of the whistleblowers got grabbed, off the street, no witnesses, no traffic cams. It's not in the news, but I heard from a friend inside the DOJ. Who? Doesn't matter. Just listen. There's going to be blowback, and they might not come for you the way you think. What does that mean? They might not come for you at all. They might try to take her. I glanced at Abby. Her eyes were locked on mine, like she knew what he was saying. I won't let them, I said. That afternoon, a package arrived. No return address. Just a box with a plain tablet inside. It powered on automatically. A video played. A dim room. A man sitting at a table, hands folded. Late 40s. Clean suit. No badge. I don't need to tell you who I am, he said, but I'll tell you what you've done. He leaned forward. You've taken something that doesn't belong to you. You've exposed a program that was designed to save lives. You think you're a hero, but you're standing in the way of progress. He paused. I'm giving you one chance. Return the dog. Walk away. No charges, no blacklisting. Just disappear, or... The screen went dark. Then a new clip played. It was Abby, from the facility. She was strapped to the table, eyes wide, mouth muzzled. A low whine came from her chest. The video cut out. Then a screen appeared. 24 hours. That was it. I smashed the tablet. Abby didn't move. She stood in the doorway, her hackles raised. We weren't going to run again. I called Brian, told him everything, sent him a recording of the message. He ran it through a voice analyzer, got a partial match. Name? Raymond Keller. Position? Director of Research Operations, Morningside Systems, a subcontractor for DARPA. Morningside was already under fire thanks to the report. Their official statement claimed the Hazel Project was a fringe trial shut down for ethics violations, but they denied everything else. No one knew Keller's current location. Brian had a theory. He's in cleanup mode. That kind of message? It's not about threats. It's about erasing evidence. He's desperate. I thought of Ethan, the fire, the shadows outside the clinic, the chip, the cages in the cave. And then I realized something. He's going to destroy the other sites. Brian was quiet for a moment. Then we get there first. We had 2 possible targets left, the Knoxville site and a second P.O. box traced to rural Pennsylvania. Brian and his contact would hit Pennsylvania. Abby and I would go to Tennessee. The Knoxville site was harder to reach. It was buried behind a wildlife conservation center, accessible only by service road. We took the old truck again, staying low, leaving no digital trail. We arrived at dusk. The trail to the site was overgrown, but not impassable. Abby moved slowly beside me, tail stiff, nose low. She knew something was wrong. The structure was a concrete rectangle tucked into the hillside, just like the Burton facility. But this one was worse. The air inside was thick with chemicals. Abby refused to enter. I went in alone. Inside were cages, lots of them, empty. The walls were scorched, files burned, equipment smashed. Someone had already cleared it out. But one thing remained, a board, like a mural, covered in photos, dogs, charts, results, and one image in the center, Abby. Below it, a single phrase, "She remembers." I stepped back, heart pounding. Whoever built this place didn't just study her, they feared her. I left and found Abby by the tree line. She didn't bark, but she stood tall, as if waiting for my confirmation. "We're done here," I said. We made it back to the truck just as headlights appeared on the trail behind us. 2 black SUVs. I didn't wait. I hit the gas and tore down the trail, branches slapping the windshield. Abby braced herself, eyes wide. They followed, gained ground. Then Abby growled, a low, guttural sound I'd only heard once before. "Hang on," I muttered. I veered off the trail into the trees. The truck bucked, tires spinning in loose dirt. The first SUV clipped a tree and skidded sideways. The second followed, but got stuck in a ditch. We kept going. Eventually, we lost them. I circled around and doubled back toward the highway. At a rest stop 30 miles out, I called Brian. "They're torching everything," I said. "They tried the Pennsylvania site too. Got there before us. But we got one name. One more person. A woman who left the program last year." "Where is she?" "New Mexico. We'll go together." Abby was asleep again, but her ears twitched with every sound. We had one more shot, and we were taking it. We crossed into New Mexico just after midnight. The desert air was crisp and dry, carrying a stillness that made every creak of the truck's suspension echo louder than it should. Abby sat beside me, ears flicking occasionally, but otherwise calm. She'd grown quieter in the last few days. Not from fear, but from something else. Focus. Resolve. Like she'd started to understand what this was really about. Brian and I had agreed to meet near Las Cruces. He'd driven in separately, using a car from one of his media contacts. We rendezvoused at a small diner off a desert highway, the kind of place that only seemed to exist between midnight and dawn. He was already inside when we arrived, sitting at a booth with a laptop and a thermos of coffee that looked like it had never been cleaned. Abby followed me in and laid beneath the table without a word. The waitress gave me a strange look, but she didn't say anything. Maybe she'd seen stranger things out here. Brian didn't waste time. "Her name's Dr. Elena Braith. She was on the Hazel project for about 8 months, left after a dispute with Keller. According to internal memos, she raised ethical concerns. Got silenced fast. Where is she now? He turned his laptop toward me, a satellite view of a small adobe house just outside of Truth or Consequences. This is the best address I could find. She's not listed anywhere official. No utilities in her name, no phone line. So how do we know she'll talk? We don't. After a short nap in the truck and a quick breakfast of day-old bagels, we drove northeast. Abby slept most of the way, curled tight, nose against her tail. When we reached the house, the sun was just starting to crest over the mountains, casting long shadows across the sand. The place looked abandoned. No car, no lights, no movement. Just wind and dust. Brian stayed in the truck while I walked to the door. Abby came with me, ears forward. I knocked once. Nothing. I was about to try again when a voice came from behind me. I wouldn't knock on doors you don't understand. I spun around. A woman stood 10 feet away, holding a shotgun low but ready. Late 50s, wiry, sun-toughened, eyes sharp. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said quickly. "You're Dr. Braith." She didn't lower the shotgun. "You were followed." I shook my head. "We've been careful." She looked past me, at Abby. Her expression changed. The barrel of the gun dipped. "That one's not just a dog," she said. "No. She's the last of them." She studied Abby for a long moment. Then she turned and walked toward a shed behind the house. Inside, now, the shed was better equipped than most clinics. Medical tables, scanning tools, stacks of lab notebooks, and a wall of secure filing cabinets. She set the shotgun on a workbench and turned to us. "You've got 10 minutes before I decide if this is worth my time." I handed her the file. The photos, the chip scanner. She barely blinked as she flipped through them. "Same layout?" she said. "Same implant shell. But the signal output here..." She pointed to a waveform Ethan had printed. "That's different." "Different how?" Brian asked. "It's reactive. The original design was meant to suppress behavioral impulses. But this?" She tapped again. "This responds to external cues. It's learning." My throat went dry. "So she's not just remembering, she's adapting?" Braith nodded. "And that terrifies them." She crossed the room and pulled out a folder from her cabinet. Inside were photos of other dogs. Scans. Some looked like Abby. Some didn't. None of them looked alive. They wanted a tool that would obey under all conditions. What they got was a mind that evolved faster than their parameters could account for. Your dog, Subject 7, was the only one who figured out how to bypass the stimuli. She started choosing, thinking beyond the commands. Brian leaned in. "Why not shut it down?" They tried, but by the time they realized what was happening, she was gone. They didn't want her back to fix her. They wanted to dissect what made her different. My jaw clenched. "So what do we do now?" She looked at Abby again. "You expose the last piece." She handed me a drive. "This is the original trial log, the unedited one. Shows everything. How they modified the chip mid-deployment. How Subject 7 responded. The order to neutralize and recover if non-compliant. All signed by Keller." Brian took the drive. "Can I copy this?" "Yes, but it won't matter unless you publish the full chain. The documents, the images, the logs, the behavioral results. If you just release one, they'll claim it's fake. If you release everything, they can't hide." We stayed another hour while she walked Brian through the encryption keys and format. Abby stayed by my side the whole time. Braith occasionally glanced at her, as if she was seeing a ghost. As we were leaving, she touched Abby's head gently. "I'm sorry. For all of it." That night we stayed in a one-room cabin Brian had rented under an alias. He was already compiling the files for release, cross-referencing with the earlier story, preparing statements, linking whistleblower interviews, setting the clock. The deadline was 6 a.m., a coordinated launch across 10 independent platforms. I couldn't sleep. Abby didn't either. She stood watch near the door all night. No growling, no pacing, just alert. At 5:55 a.m., Brian hit send. The servers flooded. One by one, the sites went live. The files spread faster than we could track them. By 7 a.m., At Hazel Truth was trending nationwide. Then came the silence. No phone calls, no messages, no threats. Abby stood by the window, ears up, waiting. At noon, it broke. A leaked memo from inside Morningside. An emergency meeting. Senior staff on leave. Then a subpoena. Then another. By nightfall, the project was no longer a conspiracy. It was a scandal. But that wasn't the end. 2 days later, Abby started reacting again. Restless, growling at the wall, avoiding the door. I scanned her again. No new signals, no new hardware, but something was happening. I called Braith. She came immediately, ran tests, checked her vitals. "It's not fear," she said. "It's instinct. She's anticipating." Anticipating what? She didn't answer. I sat with Abby that night on the porch, listening to the desert wind. She pressed close to me again, just like she had the night before we released the first report. But this time, she wasn't calm. She was waiting for something to arrive. And whatever it wasn't far now. The morning after Abby started acting strange, Braith stayed behind to observe her while Brian and I drove into town for supplies. I didn't like leaving her, but Braith had earned my trust. Still, my chest stayed tight the whole trip, and I caught myself checking the rearview mirror more than the road ahead. Brian kept glancing at his phone, scrolling through news articles and comments. The story hadn't faded. It had exploded. More whistleblowers were stepping forward. Morningside's headquarters had been put under lockdown by federal regulators. Anonymous sources were flooding forums with information. But amidst the noise, there were darker threads. Disinformation. Claims the story was staged. That Abby was a trained dog used for propaganda. Some people even speculated she wasn't real. Brian tossed his phone on the dashboard. They're trying to bury her in doubt. Standard play. But it's not working. Not yet. We picked up food, batteries, and a new hard drive to back up Braith's files again. I bought Abby her favorite peanut butter bones from the small pet section, even though I wasn't sure she'd eat them in the state she was in. When we returned to the cabin, Braith met us at the door. "She's stopped eating," she said, "and she won't let me touch the collar." We stepped inside. Abby was lying in the far corner of the room, her head up, eyes locked on us. She wasn't growling. She wasn't tense. But something had shifted. Her stillness was too precise, too sharp. "She's sensing something we can't," Braith said quietly. "Is it residual?" I asked. "From the chip?" "Maybe, but the dampener is still working. I checked it 3 times. I approached slowly. Abby didn't move, didn't blink. I crouched next to her and reached out. "Hey, girl," I whispered. "You're okay. We're okay." Her eyes softened, just a little, and she let out a breath. I sat there with her until the sun began to dip. That night, we heard the drone. It was faint at first, a soft humming above the trees. I thought it was a passing plane until it changed direction and circled back. Brian was on his feet instantly. Braith grabbed her gear. I ran outside and scanned the sky. There it was. Small, dark, fast. Not commercial. Military. Abby stepped out beside me and stared straight up at it. She didn't growl. She didn't bark. But she stood like a statue, eyes wide, tail rigid. "Back inside," I said. "Now!" We killed the lights and locked every door. Brian checked the signal jammer Braith had rigged up, then reinforced the blinds with thermal shielding. "It's scouting," he said. "Marking position. They're coming." Tonight? Or early morning? That's how these sweeps work. Quiet extraction, quick shutdown, minimal footprint. Braith loaded a black case onto the table. Inside were syringes, tranquilizers, and a tracking beacon. "If they take her," she said, "we'll need a way to follow." "No," I said. "They're not taking her." But the others didn't argue, because deep down, we all knew it was possible. We set up watches. I took first shift. Abby stayed by the door, silent and alert. I sat near her, one hand resting on her back. She didn't flinch. I thought about all the places we'd been, all the nights she'd curled up beside me, and how this one felt different. Not final, but pivotal. When Brian relieved me around 2, I laid down with one hand still on Abby's paw. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke to the soft hiss of pressure being released. Gas. "Get up!" I shouted. Braith was already on her feet, slamming a wet towel over her face. Brian kicked open the back door. I grabbed Abby's collar and pulled her toward the bathroom, slamming the door and turning on the fan. We waited. My eyes burned. Abby's breath came fast and shallow. I held her close. "Stay with me." 10 minutes passed, then 15. A thud echoed from the front room. They were inside. I opened the bathroom window and shoved the first aid kit through. Brian was outside, crouched behind the generator, motioning to me. I lifted Abby, boosting her out the window. She landed hard, but didn't whine. I scrambled out after her. We ran. Through brush, down the ravine behind the cabin. Footsteps thundered behind us, but no flashlights. They were using night vision. Brian guided us to an old maintenance road and ducked behind a downed tree. "I hit the emergency ping," he whispered. "Braith's contacts will be here in 20. I nodded, heart pounding. They were trying to take her alive. They still are. Behind us, the forest crackled. Abby shifted, then suddenly darted away from us. Not out of fear, not in flight, but with purpose. "Abby!" I hissed. Brian grabbed my arm. "She's flanking them." We stayed low, waited. Then a noise, growling, a yelp, then 2 sharp barks. A voice shouted, "She's behind us!" Then silence. Brian and I moved fast, circling around until we found her. 2 men lay unconscious, tranquilized. Abby stood between them, chest heaving, but unhurt. "Come on," I whispered. "Let's go." We made it to the road just as headlights appeared. 2 off-road vehicles with tinted windows and armed passengers. Braith stepped out of the first one. "Told you they'd come?" We piled in and drove through the night. Abby never slept. She sat in the back, eyes fixed out the window. When we stopped at a ranger station that Braith's contact had cleared for us, I finally got a moment alone with Abby. I knelt beside her and ran my fingers along the line of her collar. "You knew they were coming. That's what you were feeling." She licked my hand once, then settled beside me. Brian was on the radio with a federal liaison. They were opening a case. The recovered tranquilizer darts matched Morningside's supplier logs. One of the captured men had government credentials, but forged. The truth was out now. But this wasn't a court battle. It wasn't a lawsuit. This was something else. I watched Abby sleep at last. Even in rest, her ears flicked at every noise. We weren't done. But for the first time, I didn't feel like we were surviving. We were preparing. The ranger station was nestled deep in a protected stretch of forest that barely showed up on maps. No signs, no cell service, and only one dirt road in or out. Braith's contact, a wiry man named Hutch, had secured it with the kind of precision that said he'd done things for the government he couldn't talk about. He didn't say much, just kept walking the perimeter. Rifle slung low. Radio at his hip. Inside, Brian had transformed the central room into a makeshift command center. Maps, drives, and backup batteries were spread across a long table, with his laptop humming softly beside an old battery-powered lantern. Abby lay near the door, head on her paws, but not asleep. She hadn't truly slept in days, just dozed in short, shallow cycles. We had less than 48 hours before Braith's sources expected another sweep. It would be larger, more decisive. Not another snatch and run. The last group that came for Abby hadn't returned to whoever sent them, and someone was going to make sure it didn't happen again. What if they hit multiple places at once? I asked Braith as we stood outside, staring into the trees. They will, she said. We've poked a hole in something bigger than just Hazel. They'll try to stitch it shut. And if they find us? She turned to me, eyes steady. Then we stop running. Brian was already working on that. He'd compiled everything, every document, every photo, every test result. But more than that, he had a plan. The kind that didn't just expose, it dismantled. They've spent years building a firewall around this program, he said as we huddled in the station that night. Private servers, fake research grants, shell corporations across 3 continents, but they all funnel back to one central node, an archival server housed at a Morningside satellite facility in Nevada. If we hit that node, we erase everything they've kept hidden. Can we access it remotely? I asked. Not a chance. It's air-gapped. Only way in is physical. Hutch stepped in from the porch. I know the place. Fenced, light surveillance. The hard part is the interior. But if we can get inside, I can get you time. We planned through the night. I didn't sleep. None of us did. Abby stayed by my side the entire time. The next morning, we left at dawn. We took 2 vehicles and traveled separately, converging outside a storage depot near Henderson that Hutch used as a staging post. The Nevada air was dry and heavy, the sun glaring off every surface like a searchlight. Hutch laid out the blueprints on the hood of his truck. The facility was modest. 2 stories, single loading bay, surrounded by an electrified fence. No signs, no markings, just a patch of concrete in the middle of nowhere. A side entrance led to a control room. The archive server was 2 levels below that. We split up. Brian and I would go in with Hutch. Braith would stay with Abby and coordinate extraction. When we stepped into the dusty facility that evening, my chest was a knot of adrenaline and fear. Hutch bypassed the lock like he'd done it 100 times. Inside, the halls were sterile and silent. We moved fast, heads down, avoiding cameras. Abby wasn't with us physically, but she might as well have been. Her image lived on nearly every terminal in that place. Hutch took us through a utility corridor and down a maintenance ladder into the lower level. The server room was cold and humming. Banks of machines blinked in steady rhythm. Brian moved quickly, plugging in his access key. 3 minutes, he said. We stood watch, every second stretching. Then the alarms went off. Hutch swore. They're here. Brian kept typing. Almost there. Footsteps echoed above. Hutch handed me a small black case. This is the backup. If we don't make it, get this to Braith. You're not staying behind. I don't need to, but you might. He stepped into the hall and laid down, suppressing fire as 2 guards appeared at the stairwell. Brian pulled the drive and handed it to me. It's done. Everything's here. We moved fast. Hutch kept the path open. When we burst through the side exit into the desert light, Braith's truck was already there. Abby jumped out and ran to me, tail stiff, eyes searching. I dropped to my knees and held her tight. We got it, I whispered. It's over. But Braith didn't smile. We have a problem, she said. They're moving on the clinic. Oak Ridge. Why? To destroy the origin point. The narrative starts with you. They want to erase it. Dr. Carter, the staff, everyone who'd ever seen Abby, they were in danger. We go now, I said. Hutch nodded. We'll split. You and Abby go east. We'll take the long route and meet you at the fallback site. The drive to Tennessee was a blur. I didn't stop. Abby lay in the back seat, watching the window like she knew where we were headed. When I arrived at Oak Ridge, the lights were off. No staff cars, just a van parked out front. I crept to the door, heart racing. Inside, the place looked untouched. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Abby stiffened beside me. 2 men stepped into the exam room. They weren't local, not law enforcement. One held a lighter, the other a canister of fuel. Abby growled. They turned too late. She was a blur, knocked one over, teeth flashing. I grabbed the canister and swung it into the second man's chest. He went down, coughing. Abby pinned the first, snarling. Sirens wailed in the distance. Dr. Carter had triggered the alarm remotely. Backup was coming. I pulled Abby back gently. It's okay. We're done here. She stood panting beside me as the men groaned on the floor. 2 hours later, the authorities arrived. Real ones, with real questions. We gave them the data, the drive, the photos. Everything. The cleanup took weeks. Morningside was dissolved. Kellor disappeared, his assets frozen, his passports flagged. Whistleblowers testified. Abby's file was declassified. The world finally saw what had been done to her. Dr. Carter returned to the clinic. Brian published a book. Braith went dark, but I heard from her once, a letter with no return address and a photo of Abby pinned to her fridge. And me? I kept Abby. We moved to a quiet place by a lake. I built her a new bed by the fire. She still doesn't bark much, still flinches at sudden noise. But she smiles now. Not often, but enough. And some nights when the wind picks up and the trees whisper, she lifts her head and looks toward the woods, like she remembers. But she doesn't run. She stays. Right here. With me. Home.